In this presentation, we'll take a look at adjustments for AGI, adjusted gross income, related to educator expenses. We'll be concentrating up top on the second line of our income tax equation, that being the deductions or adjustments to income, as opposed to the standard deduction or itemized deduction, otherwise known as above the line or Schedule 1 type deductions. When looking at the first page of the 1040, we're concentrating here on line 8A. Within 8A, we have the adjustments to income from Schedule 1. This will be coming from the Schedule 1. Within the Schedule 1, we're concentrating up top on line 10, the educator expenses. Now, note that the educator expenses are specifically related to a specific industry, education. It's been put in place for some time now, and there has been a limit to it of the $250. So it's kind of one of those deductions that was put in long ago. They haven't really made much adjustments for it, so it's a fairly small deduction at this point in time, but they haven't removed it either. So in other words, it hasn't really been increasing with the cost of living or inflation, and it basically hasn't been removed, and it's related to a specific industry, which is education. So if you're doing a tax return for someone who is in education, then typically you would think they're probably spending of their own money on educational expenses something over the $250. So typically if they qualify for a qualified instructor or as an instructor for the education expenses, you would think that they would have deductions over that amount. However, of course, they would want to be able to document the $250, and note that you're going to have the limit of basically that $250 with regards to the deduction. So let's get into the details of it. We have the educator expenses. Educators who are eligible can deduct $250 of qualified education expenses for AGI. So if you're talking about someone that's within the field of education, again, it's most likely they're probably spending over $250 on their education if they're a full-time instructor in some way. They want to document that. Normally in other types of industries, notice if you were an employee somewhere other than education, it's quite possible that you spend over that amount on expenses. But because you're a W-2 employee, you don't typically get that deduction as you might if you were like a Schedule C type employee, where you'd basically get to deduct anything that you had as an expense to help you generate revenue. So special kind of exceptions for educators. Again, this is a law that happened a while ago, and the amount was more significant at that time, and it hasn't really gone up a lot in terms of inflation. They haven't been increasing it with inflation. They haven't removed it. So it's kind of just hanging out there, the $250 for the educator expenses. So eligible educator is a teacher, instructor, counselor, principal, or aide in a kindergarten through 12th grade school who devotes at least 900 hours in the school year to the job. Qualified education expenses include books, supplies, equipment, and other material used in the classroom. So obviously, just like any kind of job, we would think that a lot of the expenses would be covered by the employer for the things that we would use on the job, but quite possibly and often the case that it's not the case, and we have some other expenses that we're basically expending in order to use them on the job, specifically this job being for the classroom-related expenses. So books, supplies, equipment, other material used in the classroom. Again, oftentimes if you're qualified under this, or if you're a full-time educator, you probably have those expenses. You just want to make sure that you're logging them in, that you have some support for the expenses that you have to take this deduction.